I thought inheritance court was just about signatures and who shouted the loudest. My wealthy sister certainly thought so, sitting there with our parents like they were rehearsing a play. Just as the judge prepared to sign away every single penny of the estate to her, the courtroom doors swung open. A man in a black suit walked in, ignoring everyone, and placed a sealed envelope on the clerk's desk that silenced the entire room. My name is Megan Flores, and as I sat in the humid, wood-paneled courtroom of Hollow Ridge County, Virginia, I realized I was the only person in my family who had actually come to a funeral. Everyone else had come to a closing ceremony for a business merger. The air in the room was stale, smelling of floor wax and old paper, but the tension radiating from the plaintiff's table was sharp enough to cut glass. My sister, Sabrina Hartwell, did not wait for the court clerk to finish reading the docket number. She stood up the moment the judge adjusted his glasses, her movement fluid and practiced, like a shark surfacing to breach. Sabrina was not wearing black. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than the car I drove to get here. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, glossy knot that showcased her jawline and the diamond studs in her ears. There was no redness around her eyes, no puffiness from sleepless nights, no trembling in her hands. Her face was dry and composed, the face of a woman walking into a boardroom to sign a contract, not a granddaughter saying goodbye to the man who had raised us. Behind her sat our parents, Paul and Marianne Flores. They were not sitting like grieving children who had just lost their father. They were sitting like the board of directors backing their star CEO. My mother, Marianne, smoothed the skirt of her navy dress, her eyes fixed on the back of Sabrina's head with a look of unified determination. My father, Paul, had his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze locked on the judge, his expression cold and flat. They did not look at me. In fact, since I had walked into the room 10 minutes ago, they had actively pretended I was a piece of furniture, a slightly embarrassing, unmatched chair that someone had forgotten to move to the basement. Sitting next to Sabrina was Gordon Vance, her attorney. He was a man who wore suits that were tailored a little too tight and smiled with only his bottom teeth. He looked at the stack of documents in front of him with the hunger of a predator eyeing a wounded animal. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice smooth and oily, projecting to the back of the room without shouting. "We are here to expedite the probate process for the estate of Tomas Flores, my client. Ms. Sabrina Hartwell is the natural choice for administrator. Given the straightforward nature of the assets and the family's consensus, we move to have the letters of administration issued immediately so we can secure the estate." He did not say, "secure the estate." He made it sound like, "rescue the money." Vance slid a thin sheaf of papers across the polished mahogany table toward the judge. The movement was aggressive, decisive. It was like he was placing a knife on the table between us. "The family is in agreement, Your Honor," Vance added, finally turning his head a fraction of an inch to acknowledge my existence with a dismissive flicker of his eyelids. "With the exception, perhaps, of Ms. Flores, who has been distant during this difficult time." I felt the blood rise in my cheeks, hot and stinging. Distant? I was the one who had lived in the guest room for the last 6 months. I was the one who learned how to change oxygen tanks and crush pills into applesauce because Grandpa Tomas could not swallow them whole anymore. I was the one who held his hand at 3 in the morning when the shadows in the room scared him. Sabrina had been busy. She had galas to attend in the city, a vacation home in the Hamptons to renovate, and a social calendar that did not allow for the messy, unglamorous reality of dying. But now that the heart monitor had flatlined and the accounts were ready to be liquidated, she was here. She was front and center, ready to take charge. The judge, a weary-looking man named Judge Caldwell, who looked like he had presided over one too many family squabbles in this small county, picked up the papers Vance had slid over. He scanned them over the top of his reading glasses, sighing audibly. "Ms. Hartwell is petitioning for full control of the assets," Judge Caldwell said, his voice gravelly, "and the petition states that the decedent died intestate, without a will. Is that correct?" That is our understanding, Your Honor, Vance said quickly. We have searched the residence thoroughly. No will was found. Therefore, under Virginia law, the estate should be administered by the next of kin. Ms. Hartwell is prepared to post bond and begin the inventory immediately. We believe time is of the essence to prevent depreciation. Depreciation. He was talking about Grandpa's life's work, like it was a used car lot. The judge looked over at me. I was sitting alone at the respondent's table. I had no lawyer. I had no board of directors behind me. I just had a cheap black blazer and a stomach that felt like it was tied in 1,000 knots. Ms. Flores, the judge said, looking down at me. You are the other beneficiary in this matter. Do you have any objection to your sister being appointed as the administrator of the estate? The room went silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I could feel Sabrina's eyes on the side of my face. She turned her head slowly, looking at me. Her expression was not angry. It was worse. It was pitying. It was the look you give a child who has dropped their ice cream cone in the dirt. She was waiting for me to fold. She was waiting for me to realize that I was outgunned, outspent, and outclassed. She expected me to nod, mumble something about just wanting peace, and let her roll over me like a bulldozer. My parents shifted in their seats. I heard my mother let out a short, impatient breath through her nose. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white. I thought about the nights in the kitchen with Grandpa, the way his hands shook when he tried to sign his name on the crossword puzzle, the way he had looked at me with clear, lucid eyes 1 week before he passed and told me exactly what to do. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees. I object, Your Honor, I said. My voice was not loud, but in the quiet courtroom, it sounded like a gunshot. Sabrina blinked. It was the first crack in her porcelain mask. Vance stopped smiling. On what grounds? Judge Caldwell asked, looking bored again. Do you have a will? Do you have a competing petition to be administrator? I do not have a will, Your Honor, I said. Vance let out a scoff that was loud enough to be heard by the court reporter. Your Honor, if there is no will, this is a waste of the court's time. Ms. Flores is simply being obstructionist because of personal animosity between the siblings. I object, I repeated, my voice stronger this time. But I am not asking to be administrator. Then what are you doing? The judge asked, leaning forward. If you are not filing a competing petition and you do not have a will, why are you stopping me from signing this order? I took a deep breath. I looked at the heavy wooden double doors at the back of the courtroom. They were closed. I am waiting, I said. I want to wait for the last person to arrive. For a second, there was total silence. Then, a ripple of laughter went through the room. It was not joyful laughter. It was the sound of people who thought I was crazy. My mother leaned forward and whispered loudly to my father. She is doing it again. She is making a scene. Vance shook his head, looking at the judge with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. Your Honor, who is this last person? Is this a witness? Another family member we do not know about? This sounds like a delay tactic. We have a schedule to keep, and my client has flown in specifically for this hearing. Ms. Flores, Judge Caldwell said, his tone sharpening into a warning. This is a court of law, not a stage for dramatic reveals. If you do not have a legal basis for an objection, I am going to proceed. We do not hold up the docket for mysterious guests. Sabrina turned her body fully toward me now. Her gaze was icy. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when we were teenagers, and I borrowed her clothes without asking, like I was a pest that needed to be exterminated. Megan, she hissed, her voice low but carrying. Stop embarrassing yourself. Stop embarrassing Mom and Dad. Just sit down. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the diamond earrings that probably cost $20,000. I saw the perfect manicure. I saw a stranger. I am not doing this for me, I said to her. Then I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I cannot tell you who it is because I do not know his name, but I know he is coming, and if you sign that order before he gets here, you will be signing a mistake. A mistake? Vance laughed, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. The only mistake here is entertaining this nonsense. Your Honor, I move for an immediate ruling. Ms. Flores has a history of instability. We have concerns that if she is given access to the estate, or if this is delayed, she might attempt to hide or damage assets. She has been living in the house alone for months. God knows what has already gone missing. That is a lie, I shouted, the controls slipping for just a second. I have not touched a thing. I have been paying the electric bill with my own money. Order! Judge Caldwell banged his gavel. Ms. Flores, control yourself. Mr. Vance, I am inclined to agree with you. We cannot wait around on a hunch. The judge picked up his pen. He hovered it over the signature line of the order that would hand everything my grandfather owned, his house, his savings, his legacy, over to Sabrina Hartwell. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Grandpa, I thought desperately. You said he would come. You said to just wait. Your Honor, please, I said, my voice trembling. Just give me 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes. Denied, Judge Caldwell said. The court has heard enough. The pen tip touched the paper. Sabrina smiled. It was a small, triumphant smile. The smile of a woman who always gets what she wants because she believes she deserves it. My parents let out a collective sigh of relief, their shoulders dropping. Vance looked smug, already mentally calculating his billable hours. I felt a wave of nausea. I had failed. I had stood my ground. I had waited. And it wasn't enough. The system was a machine, and it was crushing me. And then, the sound of the latch clicking echoed through the room. It was a heavy metallic clack that cut through the drone of the air conditioning. The judge froze, his pen still touching the paper. Everyone turned. Sabrina, Vance, my parents, the bailiff, the clerk. We all turned to look at the double doors at the back of the room. One of the doors swung open. It didn't bang against the wall. It opened with a slow, deliberate weight, as if pushed by a hand that knew exactly how much force to use. A man stepped into the courtroom. He was not from Hollow Ridge. You could tell that instantly. He was wearing a black suit, but it wasn't a funeral suit, and it certainly wasn't a cheap polyester blend like the one the bailiff wore. It was tailored to perfection, the fabric absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. He wore a crisp white shirt and a black tie. He carried no briefcase, no stack of files, no phone. He held only one thing, a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. The man was tall, with silver hair cut close to his head and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at Sabrina, who had half risen from her chair, her mouth slightly open. He didn't look at Vance, who was frowning in confusion. He didn't look at my parents, who were staring at him with open hostility. He walked down the center aisle. His footsteps on the wooden floor were rhythmic, steady, and terrifyingly calm. Click, click, click. He walked straight past the bar, ignoring the bailiff who had started to step forward to intercept him. The sheer authority radiating off him made the bailiff hesitate. And in that second of hesitation, the man was already past. He stopped at the clerk's table, directly in front of the judge. He did not say, "Good morning." He did not say, "May I approach?" He placed the sealed envelope on the desk in front of the court clerk. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the wood was softer than a gavel, but somehow much louder. Then, for the first time, he turned. He turned slowly, deliberately, until he was facing the respondent's table. He looked me right in the eyes. His eyes were gray and completely unreadable, devoid of any warmth but filled with a terrifying competence. "Megan Flores," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a verification. To understand why I was the only person in that courtroom not hyperventilating when the stranger said my name, you have to understand that my grandfather did not die in a sudden, tragic accident. He faded. It was a slow, grueling erosion that stripped away his mobility first, then his independence, but never his sharp, biting intelligence. 6 months ago, Tomas Flores fell in his backyard. It was a Tuesday. He had been trying to prune the hydrangeas that grew along the back fence, the ones grandmother had planted 40 years ago. He slipped on a patch of wet moss and fractured his hip. By the time I got the call and drove 2 hours from my small apartment in the city to the hospital, the narrative had already been set. My parents were talking about assisted living facilities. They were browsing brochures for places that looked like hotels but smelled like antiseptic and despair. I refused. I broke my lease, packed my life into 12 cardboard boxes, and moved into the guest room on the ground floor of Grandpa's house. The reality of caring for an 80-year-old man is not what you see in movies. There is no soft, golden lighting or sentimental music playing in the background. It is exhausted, gritty work. It is waking up at 3 a.m. because the oxygen concentrator is beeping an alarm. It is arguing with insurance companies on the phone for 45 minutes just to get a refill on pain medication. It is watching a proud man, a man who built a construction business from nothing, struggle to hold a spoon without spilling soup on his chin. For 4 months, it was just the two of us. My world shrank to the 4 walls of that house in Hollow Ridge. I learned the rhythm of his breathing. I learned which floorboards creaked. I learned that he liked his coffee lukewarm because hot liquid hurt his gums. Sabrina was not there. My sister was busy. That was the family motto. Sabrina is busy. She was busy chairing the gala for the Botanic Gardens. She was busy overseeing the renovation of her summer house in the vineyard. She was busy being Sabrina Hartwell, the success story, the one who married into old money and leveraged it into a personal brand of untouchable elegance. She sent flowers once, white lilies. They smelled like a funeral parlor 2 months before he actually died. But then, 3 weeks before the end, the atmosphere changed. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, my hands red from the hot water. The back door opened, and Sabrina walked in. She was wearing a trench coat that probably cost more than my student loans, and she was followed closely by my parents. They did not ask how Grandpa was sleeping. They did not ask if he was eating. Sabrina walked straight to the living room, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the paintings, the antique sideboard, the silver tea set on the shelf. It was an appraisal. She was not looking at a home. She was looking at an inventory list. "Megan," my mother said, placing her purse on the counter without looking at me, "we need to have a family meeting. There are things that need to be settled." "Grandpa is resting," I said, drying my hands on a towel. "He had a bad night. His chest is congested." "This won't take long," my father said. His voice was firm, the voice he used when he wanted to end a conversation before it started. "Sabrina has brought in a specialist, a financial advisor. We need to make sure Father's assets are structured correctly for tax purposes. If we wait until he passes, the government will take 40%. A man I had never seen before stepped in from the hallway. He was younger than I expected, wearing a suit that was too shiny and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. "Who is this?" I asked, stepping between them and the hallway leading to Grandpa's bedroom. "This is Mr. Sterling," Sabrina said, brushing past me. "He is an estate planner. He has a package prepared that will transfer the title of the house and the investment accounts into a family LLC. It is standard procedure. Megan, do not make this difficult." "He is sick," I said, my voice rising. "He is on morphine. He cannot sign legal documents right now." Sabrina stopped and turned to me. She offered a tight, patronizing smile. "Megan, you are good at the nursing stuff. Changing sheets, making soup, that is your strength. Let me handle the money. I know how to protect this family. You are just going to let it bleed away in probate fees because you are too emotional to be practical." My mother nodded in agreement. "Listen to your sister. Megan, she knows about these things. We are doing this for you too. You do not want to see Grandpa's hard work go to the tax man, do you?" They pushed past me. I followed them into the bedroom, my heart pounding in my throat. Grandpa was propped up on pillows, his breathing shallow. When he saw them, his eyes widened slightly, but he didn't smile. Mr. Sterling wasted no time. He set up a portable table over the bed. He laid out a stack of documents that were flagged with yellow sticky notes. "Mr. Flores," the advisor said, his voice loud and slow, as if speaking to a child. "We have some paperwork here to protect your estate. It is just a formality to move your assets into a protected entity. Your daughter Sabrina will be the manager. Just to handle the administrative side, you just need to sign here, here, and here." He clicked a pen and tried to press it into Grandpa's trembling hand. "What is this?" Grandpa wheezed. His voice was thin, like dry leaves scraping together. "It is for taxes, Grandpa," Sabrina said, leaning over him. Her perfume was overpowering in the small room. "It saves us money. Just sign it. We do not have much time before the banks close." I watched Grandpa's hand hover over the paper. He looked at the dense paragraphs of legal text. He looked at Sabrina, then at my parents standing at the foot of the bed with their arms crossed. "I cannot read this," Grandpa whispered. "I need my glasses. I need to read it." "There is no need to read every word, Father," my dad said impatiently. "It is standard boilerplate. Sabrina had her lawyers draft it. It is fine." "Sign," Sabrina urged, tapping the paper. Grandpa dropped the pen. It rolled across the blanket and fell onto the floor. "No," he said. The room went deadly silent. "What do you mean?" "No," Sabrina asked, her voice losing its sweetness. "I do not sign what I do not read," Grandpa said, closing his eyes. "And I do not sign without a witness who is not benefiting." Sabrina straightened up, her face flushing with anger. She looked at the advisor, then back at Grandpa. "We can get a mobile notary here in 20 minutes. I have one on speed dial. We can get this done tonight." "Get out," Grandpa said. It wasn't a shout. It was barely a whisper, but it had the weight of iron. "Grandpa, be reasonable," Sabrina started. "I said get out," he rasped. Coughing violently, I rushed to his side, grabbing the oxygen mask. "You heard him," I said, glaring at my family. "Leave, now." They left. But the air in the house had changed. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a siege. I heard them arguing in the driveway. I heard Sabrina on the phone, screaming about uncooperative behavior and mental capacity evaluations. That night, around 2 a.m, I was sitting in the kitchen staring at a cup of cold tea. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. "Megan," I jumped. Grandpa was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. He was leaning heavily on his walker, wearing his flannel pajamas. He shouldn't have been out of bed. "Grandpa," I said, rushing over to help him. "What are you doing? You need to rest." "Sit down," he said. He pointed to the chair opposite him. We sat in the dim light of the stove hood. He looked exhausted, his skin gray and papery, but his eyes were clear, fiercely clear. "They think I'm stupid," he said softly. "They think because my legs do not work. My brain is gone. Sabrina, she looked at me today like I was an obstacle, not a person, an obstacle." "They are just worried about the money," I said, trying to be diplomatic, though I felt sick. "They want me to sign before I die," he said. "They tried to bring a notary here last week, when you went to the grocery store. Did you know that? The neighbor told them to leave." My blood ran cold. I hadn't known. "They will try again," Grandpa said. "Sabrina is used to winning. She thinks the law is something you buy, like a handbag. But I built this life with my hands. I poured concrete when it was 90 degrees outside. I'm not going to let them carve it up like a turkey before I'm even cold." He reached into the pocket of his pajamas and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It had a phone number scrawled on it in shaky handwriting. "Tomorrow," he said. "You will drive me to this address. Do not tell your mother. Do not tell your father. And certainly do not tell Sabrina." "Who is it?" I asked. "A lawyer," he said. "Not Vance. Vance plays golf with Sabrina's husband. This is my lawyer. From the old days. Before we had money. He is retired. But he owes me a favor." The next day, I lied to my parents. I told them I was taking Grandpa to a specialist for his lungs. I drove him 40 minutes to a small, nondescript office in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. There was no marble in the lobby. There was no receptionist. I waited in the car for 2 hours. I watched the people walking by, wondering if I was doing the right thing, wondering if I was kidnapping my own grandfather. But when he came out, he looked lighter. The tension in his shoulders was gone. He was holding a thick manila folder. He didn't show it to me. He just placed it on his lap and patted it with his hand. "Is it done?" I asked. "It is done," he said. "Drive me home, Megan. I am tired." He declined rapidly after that day. It was as if holding on for that meeting was the last thing keeping him tethered to the earth. The nights got longer. The confusion started to creep in. But whenever he had a moment of clarity, he would grab my hand. 3 days before he died, he pulled me close. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Megan," he whispered, "listen to me. I am here, Grandpa. When I go, they will come. They will come with their lawyers and their suits and their loud voices. They will try to scare you. They will try to tell you that you have nothing, that you are nobody. I don't care about the money, Grandpa," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I know," he said. "That is why you are the only one I trust. But you must promise me something. If they drag you to court, if they try to erase what I wanted, do not fight them with shouting. Do not fight them with tears." He took a ragged breath. "You just wait," he said. "You wait for the man with the file. He knows. He has the instructions." "What man?" I asked. "Grandpa? What man?" "The Stonebridge man," he mumbled, his eyes drifting shut. "Just wait." That was the last clear thing he ever said to me. When he died. Sabrina took over the funeral planning within an hour. She selected the casket, the flowers, the music. She turned his memorial into a networking event. I stood in the back, invisible, and then came the court summons, the motion for immediate transfer of assets, the accusations that I was uncooperative. So I sat in that courtroom, enduring their glares and their laughter, holding on to that one fragile promise: wait for the man. I didn't know if he existed. I didn't know if the old lawyer in the strip mall had actually done anything, or if it was just the confused ramblings of a dying man. But then the doors opened, and the man in black walked in. He stood at the clerk's table, his back straight, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. He looked at me, confirming my identity, before turning his attention to the stunned judge. "Who are you?" Judge Caldwell asked, recovering from his surprise. "And what is the meaning of this interruption?" The man placed a hand on the sealed envelope he had set on the desk. He did not flinch. He did not apologize. "My name is Silas Rourke," he said, his voice deep and resonant, filling the corners of the room. "I represent the Fiduciary Trust Administration." The silence that followed Silas Rourke's introduction was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when the air conditioning cuts out in a crowded room and suddenly everyone becomes aware of their own breathing. Judge Caldwell looked down at the envelope on his desk. He did not touch it immediately. I watched his face closely. I had spent the last hour watching him look bored, annoyed, and impatient with my lack of legal representation, but now, his expression shifted, the boredom evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp alertness. He leaned forward, peering at the return address embossed in the upper left corner of the heavy cream paper. He was not afraid of the money. Judges in this county saw money all the time. They saw divorces where people fought over yachts and racehorses. No. What I saw on Judge Caldwell's face was the fear of a bureaucrat who realizes he almost made a procedural error that would have ended his career. He recognized the logo. He recognized the authority it carried. "Stonebridge," the judge muttered, almost to himself. He picked up a letter opener, a silver blade that caught the dull courtroom light. He sliced the seal open. The sound was crisp, like a dry twig snapping. "Your Honor," Gordon Vance said, his voice a little too loud, a little too eager to regain control of the room. I must insist. Who is this individual? We have a motion on the table. My client has flights booked to return to New York. We cannot be held up by— Quiet, Mr. Vance, Judge Caldwell said. He did not look up. He was pulling a stack of documents out of the envelope. They were bound with a blue legal backing, thick and substantial. Silas Rourke stood by the clerk's desk. He did not move. He did not shift his weight. He stood with his hands clasped loosely in front of him, radiating a calm that made Vance's fidgeting look frantic by comparison. I am Silas Rourke, the man in black repeated, his voice level and devoid of any theatricality. I am a senior trust officer with the Stonebridge Fiduciary Trust Division. I am here to serve notice to this court that the estate of Tomas Flores is not subject to probate administration. Sabrina let out a sharp, incredulous breath. Excuse me? That is ridiculous. My father died 2 weeks ago. Of course there is an estate. Rourke turned his head slightly, acknowledging her for the first time. His eyes swept over her cream coat and her diamond earrings with clinical detachment. The assets in question, he said, turning back to the judge, were retitled into the Tomas Flores Revocable Living Trust 6 months ago. Upon his death, that trust became irrevocable. Stonebridge is named as the successor trustee. The judge was reading rapidly now. Flipping through the pages, I could see the headers from where I sat. Certification of trust, acceptance of trusteeship, schedule of assets. This is impossible, Vance sputtered. He stood up, smoothing his tie, his face flushing a blotchy red. Your Honor, we did a comprehensive search of the decedent's records. There was no trust. We found bank statements in his name. We found the deed to the house in his name. You found the personal checking account he used for groceries, Rourke said. The operating account. It contains approximately $4,000. That is the extent of the probate estate. Everything else, the investment portfolio, the real estate holdings, the construction company shares, was funded into the trust on August 15th. August 15th. I remembered that day. That was the day after I had driven Grandpa to the strip mall. The day he had sat in the backyard for 3 hours, just watching the birds, with a strange, peaceful smile on his face. Your Honor, Vance argued, stepping out from behind his table. We are in probate court. This is the wrong jurisdiction for trust matters. If this document even exists, which I question, it needs to be verified. We cannot just accept a piece of paper handed over by a stranger in a suit. I move to strike this interruption from the record and proceed with the appointment of Ms. Hartwell as administrator. Judge Caldwell stopped reading. He looked up over his glasses. His eyes were cold. Sit down, Mr. Vance, the judge said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. But, Your Honor, I said sit down, Caldwell repeated, his voice dropping an octave. I am holding a notarized certification of trust, drafted by one of the most reputable firms in the state and administered by a fiduciary institution that manages billions of dollars in assets. This is not a napkin scribbled on in a diner. This is a fully funded instrument. Vance sat down. He sank into his chair as if his strings had been cut. He knew what this meant. I could see the realization dawning on him. Probate lawyers get paid a percentage of the estate they administer, or they bill hourly for the long, messy process of inventory and distribution. If the assets were in a trust, there was no probate, there was no administration fee, there was no percentage. The pie he had been ready to carve up had just vanished from the table. Sabrina, however, was not thinking about legal fees. She was thinking about control. I watched her face, the mask of the grieving. Capable daughter was slipping. Her jaw was set so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. She knew the name Stonebridge. In her world, the world of charity galas and private equity husbands, Stonebridge was the gold standard. They were the people you hired when you didn't trust your family. They were institutional. They were corporate. You could not cry in front of them and get your way. You could not threaten to call their manager because they answered to a board of directors. You could not charm them. "This is a mistake," Sabrina said, her voice tight. My father was confused. He didn't know what he was signing. He would never appoint a bank to manage his money. He would have appointed family. He would have appointed me. "The document is quite specific. Ms. Hartwell," Judge Caldwell said, tapping the paper. "It explicitly bypasses family appointment in favor of an independent corporate trustee. And frankly, given the scene I have witnessed here today, I can see why he might have made that choice." The judge turned a page. The room was so quiet, I could hear the friction of the paper. "Mr. Rourke," the judge said, "you have presented the certification. What is your application to this court?" "We are not applying for anything, Your Honor," Rourke said smoothly. "We are filing the notice of trust to close the probate file. However, there is one specific provision I am obligated to highlight. Given the motion filed by Mr. Vance this morning," Rourke gestured toward the document in the judge's hand. "Article 9, Section 3. Judge Caldwell flipped to the back of the document. He scanned the page, then he stopped. He read the paragraph twice. When he looked up, his expression was grave. "Mr. Vance," the judge said softly, "did you read the petition you filed this morning? The one demanding the immediate transfer of all assets to your client?" "Of course I did," Vance said, though he looked less certain now. "It is a standard petition for letters of administration. And in that petition," the judge continued, "you asserted that the decedent died intestate and that your client was the sole rightful decision-maker for the assets." "Yes," Vance said. "Well," Judge Caldwell said, leaning back in his chair, "you might want to explain the concept of a no-contest clause to your client." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A no-contest clause. Even I knew what that was. It was the nuclear option in estate planning. It meant that if a beneficiary challenged the validity of the trust, or tried to claim more than their share, or tried to circumvent the terms the deceased had set down, they were automatically disinherited. They got nothing. Zero. "The provision is standard," Rourke said, his voice cutting through the tension. "It states that any beneficiary who seeks to invalidate the trust, or who asserts a claim to estate assets outside the governance of this trust, shall be treated as if they had predeceased the grantor, without issue." The color drained from Gordon Vance's face. He looked at the motion papers sitting in front of him. The papers he had aggressively slid across the table 10 minutes ago. By filing a motion claiming the assets belonged to a probate estate, he had effectively attacked the jurisdiction of the trust. He had just walked his client into a trap. Sabrina looked at Vance. "Gordon," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and panic. "What is he talking about? What does that mean?" "It means," Judge Caldwell said, answering for the lawyer, "that by coming into my courtroom and demanding the assets be handed over to you directly, claiming there was no plan in place, you may have just forfeited your entire inheritance. You triggered the penalty." My parents gasped. My mother put a hand to her mouth. "That is not possible," she whispered. "Sabrina is his daughter. He wouldn't do that." "The language is clear," Rourke said. "Mr. Flores was very specific. He anticipated that an attempt might be made to seize control of the assets before the trust could be administered. He included a specific trigger for any legal filing that misrepresented the estate's status." I looked at the empty chair next to me. I felt a surge of warmth in my chest, a feeling so intense it almost brought me to tears. Grandpa. He knew. He sat in that kitchen, eating his lukewarm soup, listening to them plot to bring a notary to his deathbed, and he had built a wall they couldn't climb. He hadn't just protected the money, he had set a bear trap. Sabrina stood up. The chair legs scraped screechingly against the floor. She wasn't looking at the judge anymore. She wasn't looking at Rourke. She was looking at the money disappearing. She was seeing the renovation of the Hamptons' house halt halfway through. She was seeing her status in her husband's eyes crumble. She needed a way out. She needed to break the trust itself. If the trust was invalid, the clause was invalid. If the trust was gone. We went back to probate, and she won. She turned slowly toward me. Her eyes were not the eyes of a sister. They were the eyes of a cornered animal that has decided to bite. "This is fraud," Sabrina said. Her voice was shaking, but it was gaining strength. "This whole thing is a fraud." "Ms. Hartwell," the judge warned. "Be careful." "No," Sabrina shouted, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Look at her. Look at Megan. She lived with him for 6 months. She isolated him. She kept us away. She wouldn't let us talk to him on the phone. She told us he was sleeping when he wasn't." "That is not true," I said, standing up. "You never called." "She poisoned him against us," Sabrina screamed, her composure shattering completely. "She dragged a senile, dying man to some strip mall lawyer and forced him to sign papers he didn't understand. She manipulated him to cut us out and give control to some stranger." She turned to the judge, her face twisted into a mask of righteous victimhood. "Your Honor, I need to place a formal allegation on the record immediately," Sabrina said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, venomous hiss. "This trust is the product of undue influence. Megan Flores took advantage of a vulnerable adult. She abused her position as a caregiver to steal this estate, and I can prove it." The moment the words undue influence left my sister's mouth, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from a procedural dispute to a street fight. We were no longer discussing statutes or trust certifications. We were discussing my soul. Sabrina did not sit down after making her accusation. She remained standing, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly that the skin over her knuckles looked like stretched parchment. She had realized that the law was a wall she could not climb, so she had decided to burn the house down instead, if she could prove I was a villain, a manipulator who had preyed on a dying man. Then the trust would be void. The no contest clause would be irrelevant, because the document itself would be fruit of a poisonous tree. "Explain yourself, Ms. Hartwell," Judge Caldwell said. His voice was not inviting. It was the tone of a man who was watching a car accident unfold and had to decide who was at fault. "It started 6 months ago," Sabrina said, her voice trembling with a practiced vibrato. She turned her body slightly so she was addressing the gallery, playing to the audience of 3 bored retirees and 1 sleeping bailiff. "When my father fell, Megan moved in. We thought she was there to help. We were so grateful, but then the phone calls stopped." She looked at our parents. "Mom, tell the judge what happened when you tried to call Dad." My mother, Marianne, stood up slowly. She looked smaller than she had 10 minutes ago. She clutched a handkerchief she had not used yet. "He never answered," my mother said, her voice thin and wavering. "Every time I called the house, Megan picked up. She would say he was sleeping. She would say he was in the bath. She would say he was having a bad day. I just wanted to speak to my husband. I just wanted to tell him I loved him." "We went to the house," my father added, staying seated but leaning forward, his face etched with a performative sorrow. "We drove over there. The curtains were drawn. The doors were locked. Megan wouldn't let us in. She said he was contagious. She said the doctor ordered no visitors." I stared at them, my mouth slightly open. I felt like I was hallucinating. "That is a lie," I whispered. "You never came. You never once drove to the house." "Quiet, Ms. Flores," the judge snapped at me. He turned back to Sabrina. "So you are alleging that your sister isolated the decedent to control his environment?" "It is not just an allegation, Your Honor," Sabrina said, gaining confidence. "It is a pattern. She controlled his food, she controlled his medication, and most importantly, she controlled who had access to him during the critical period when this so-called trust was created. She fed him lies about us. She made him believe we didn't care. She twisted his mind until he signed whatever she put in front of him." Gordon Vance, seeing a lifeline, jumped back into the fray. "Your Honor, this is a textbook case of undue influence. We have a vulnerable testator, 80 years old, on heavy pain medication. We have a beneficiary in a position of dominance, and we have a radical change in the estate plan that disinherits the natural heirs in favor of the caregiver. The presumption of undue influence is established. I have witnesses, Sabrina announced. She gestured to the back of the room. The heavy oak doors opened again. But this time it wasn't a man in a black suit. It was two people I hadn't thought about in a decade. My great-aunt Linda and my second cousin, Ricky. They walked in looking like they had been dressed by a costume department for a play about humble, honest folk. Linda was wearing a floral dress that looked too big for her. Ricky was wearing a polo shirt buttoned to the top. They walked down the aisle, avoiding my eyes. These are family members who visited during the final months, Sabrina lied smoothly. They saw what was happening. Judge Caldwell looked at the two newcomers. He did not look impressed. He looked tired. "State your names for the record," the judge said. "Linda Miller," my aunt said, clutching her purse. "Ricky Miller," my cousin mumbled. "And what did you observe?" Vance asked, stepping out to guide them. "She was scary," Linda said, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I went to drop off a casserole. Megan was yelling at Tomas. She was yelling at him to drink his juice. She told him if he didn't drink it, she would put him in a home. I heard it through the window." "I saw her throw away his mail," Ricky added, looking at his shoes. "I was fixing the gutter. I saw her take letters from Sabrina and put them in the trash." I felt the blood drain from my face. Ricky hadn't fixed a gutter in his life. He lived 3 states away. Sabrina must have flown them in, paid for their hotels, and handed them a script. It was a coordinated assault. "This is insane," I said. Standing up, my hands were shaking. "Ricky, you haven't been to Virginia in 5 years. "Sit down, Ms. Flores." The judge banged his gavel. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. "Your Honor, this is an ambush." A sharp, clear female voice rang out. Everyone turned. A woman stood up from the front row of the gallery. I hadn't noticed her come in. She must have slipped in behind Silas Rourke. She was tall, wearing a charcoal gray suit that was cut as sharply as a razor blade. She had dark hair cut in a severe bob, and she wore thick-rimmed glasses. She held a leather briefcase in one hand. She walked through the bar, passing Vance without looking at him. "And who are you?" Judge Caldwell asked, his eyebrows raising. "Avery Knox," she said. "I am the attorney for Ms. Megan Flores." I blinked. I didn't know an Avery Knox. She turned to me and gave a nearly imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Play along." I was retained by the decedent, Tomas Flores, to represent his granddaughter's interests in the event of this specific litigation, Avery said. Her voice was cool, professional, and completely unintimidated. Mr. Flores anticipated that his family would resort to character assassination when the legal arguments failed. He placed a retainer with my firm, Knox and Partners, to ensure Ms. Flores had defense counsel. She placed a notice of appearance on the judge's bench. "Your Honor," Avery continued, turning to face Sabrina, "these accusations are serious. They are also entirely anecdotal. We are in a court of law, not a daytime talk show. Where are the medical records stating Mr. Flores lacked capacity? Where are the police reports regarding this alleged elder abuse? Where are the complaints to Adult Protective Services?" "We didn't call the police because we wanted to keep it private," Sabrina shot back. "We were trying to protect the family reputation." "How convenient," Avery said dryly. "You were concerned about reputation then, but you are willing to drag your sister through the mud. Now that there is $5 million on the table," Judge Caldwell looked at Sabrina. "Ms. Knox has a point. You are alleging that your father was mentally incompetent and under duress. Do you have a physician's statement from that time period declaring him unfit?" "He was on morphine," Vance argued. "That is a matter of record." "Pain management does not equal incapacity," the judge said. "I need evidence, not stories from a cousin who was allegedly fixing a gutter." The judge turned his gaze to Silas Rourke, who had been watching the exchange with the impassive stillness of a statue. "Mr. Rourke," the judge said, "your institution acted as the trustee. You accepted the assets. Did Stonebridge perform due diligence regarding the grantor's capacity and the potential for undue influence?" We did. Your Honor, Silas said. He stepped forward again. Stonebridge does not accept a trusteeship of this magnitude without a rigorous intake process. We are well aware of the litigation risks in families with high net worth and complex dynamics. Silas opened his folder. He pulled out a document with a red border. This is a certificate of independent review, Silas said, because Mr. Flores was disinheriting natural heirs in favor of a caregiver. We required him to meet with an independent attorney, not his estate planner, and not anyone related to Ms. Flores. He met with a specialist in elder law. Alone, for 2 hours on August 10th. Alone? The judge asked. Completely alone, Silas confirmed. Ms. Flores was waiting in the car in the parking lot. We have the security footage from the building. The independent attorney certified that Mr. Flores was lucid, that he understood the nature of his assets, and that he was acting under his own free will. He specifically discussed the reasons for excluding his daughter and the rest of his family. Silas handed the certificate to the judge. Furthermore, Silas added, we have the intake interview transcript. In it, Mr. Flores explicitly states that he limited contact with his family because, and I quote, they only come when they smell money. My mother let out a gasp that sounded like a sob. That is not him. He would never say that. It is on tape. Mrs. Flores, Silas said. He didn't look at her. He spoke to the air. We recorded the session with his consent. Sabrina's face was turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. Her narrative was crumbling. The isolated, confused old man she had invented was being replaced by the sharp, angry man she had actually ignored. This is a setup, Sabrina hissed. Megan coached him. She told him what to say to the lawyer. Ms. Hartwell, Judge Caldwell warned, you are treading on thin ice. You are accusing an officer of the court and a fiduciary institution of conspiracy. I am accusing her, Sabrina shouted, pointing at me again. She is the one who did this. She is the one who stole everything. Your Honor, Silas interrupted, his voice cutting through her shouting. There is one more document. The room went quiet again. Silas reached into the back of his portfolio. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't typed. It was lined yellow notebook paper. The edges were slightly ragged, as if it had been torn from a spiral notebook. When we finalized the trust, Silas said, Mr. Flores asked if he could leave a personal statement. He said he wanted something in his own handwriting, to be revealed only if his family challenged the validity of his decisions. I object, Vance yelled. This is hearsay. It is a declaration against interest, Avery Knox countered smoothly, and it goes to state of mind. It is admissible. Judge Caldwell held out his hand. Give it to me. Silas handed the yellow paper to the clerk, who walked it up to the bench. The judge put on his reading glasses. He took the paper. He looked at it. For a long time. The only sound in the room was the hum of the ventilation system. The judge read the paper, then he stopped. He looked up at the ceiling, took a deep breath, and looked back down at the paper. Sabrina was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked like she wanted to run up to the bench and snatch the paper out of his hands. Ms. Hartwell, Judge Caldwell said quietly, your father had very distinct handwriting. It was quite shaky toward the end, wasn't it? Yes, Sabrina whispered. But legible, the judge said. Very legible. He looked over at me. His expression had softened. It wasn't pity anymore. It was something like respect. Ms. Flores, the judge said to me. Did you know he wrote this? I knew he wrote something, I said, my voice barely audible. But I never read it. He sealed it in the envelope himself. He knew, the judge said, looking back at Sabrina. He knew exactly what you were going to do today. He predicted the undue influence claim. He predicted the witnesses. The judge cleared his throat. He looked at the court reporter. Read this into the record, the judge ordered. The clerk took the yellow paper. She adjusted her glasses. She looked at the handwriting, squinting slightly. Then she began to read. To the judge who is listening to my daughter scream, the clerk read. The room froze. If you are reading this, it means Sabrina has told you that Megan brainwashed me. It means she has brought people into your courtroom to say that Megan was cruel. It means they are trying to say, I was too sick to know who loved me. The clerk paused. She looked up at Sabrina, whose face had gone pale white. I am writing this on my kitchen table. The clerk continued reading. Megan is in the other room making tea. She thinks I am sleeping. She has not slept in 3 weeks. She washes my sheets. She listens to my stories. She is the only one who looks at me and sees a man, not a bank account. My eyes filled with tears. I couldn't stop them. I am of sound mind, the note read. I know exactly how much money I have. I have $12 million in assets. And I know exactly why Sabrina is there today. She is there because she thinks she's entitled to it. She thinks because she carries my last name. She owns my sweat. The clerk turned the page. I am not giving Megan my money because she manipulated me, the note concluded. I am giving Megan my money because she was the only one who didn't ask for it. And if Sabrina is standing there right now, telling you that she was kept away, ask her this. Ask her about the text message she sent to her husband on July 4th, the one where she said, I hope the old bastard kicks the bucket before the summer season ends. I need the liquidity. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. Sabrina stopped breathing. Gordon Vance looked like he had been shot. My parents looked at Sabrina with wide, horrified eyes. I saw it on her phone when she left it on the counter. The note finished. That was the day I called the lawyer. Signed, Tomas Flores. Judge Caldwell slowly lowered the paper. He looked at Sabrina. Ms. Hartwell, the judge said, his voice deadly quiet. Did you send that text? Sabrina opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at her husband, who was sitting in the back row. He had his face in his hands. Sabrina stammered. It was a joke. It was just a joke. A joke, the judge repeated. He looked at the clerk. Enter the note into evidence as Exhibit A. Then the judge looked at the clock on the wall. We are going to take a recess, Judge Caldwell said. Mr. Vance, I suggest you take this time to explain to your client the definition of perjury. And when we come back, we are going to discuss the sanctions hearing. But, Your Honor, Vance pleaded, his voice weak, we can withdraw the motion. You cannot withdraw the truth, Counselor, Judge Caldwell said. He was about to bang the gavel when the side door of the courtroom opened again. A court officer, a sheriff's deputy with a grim face, walked in. He didn't look at the gallery. He walked straight up to the bench and handed the judge a folded piece of paper. Judge Caldwell took it. He frowned. He read it quickly. Then he looked up. But this time, he didn't look at Sabrina. He looked at my father, Paul Flores. Mr. Flores, the judge said, please remain in your seat. Me? My father asked, confused. Why? Because, the judge said, holding up the new paper. This just came in from the clerk's office downstairs. It seems that while we have been sitting here arguing about the trust, someone attempted to file a deed transfer for the family home using a power of attorney document dated yesterday. My father went pale. The problem is, the judge said, his eyes narrowing. Mr. Flores has been dead for 2 weeks. Power of attorney dies with the principal, attempting to use it after death to transfer real estate. That is a felony. The judge looked at the deputy. Secure the courtroom, the judge said. Nobody leaves. The courtroom was no longer a place of law. It was an operating theater where the anatomy of my family's greed was being dissected. Layer by rotten layer, the revelation of Sabrina's text message had sucked the air out of the room, but Judge Caldwell was not finished. He held the yellow-lined paper as if it were a holy text, his eyes scanning back to the very top of the page. There is a preamble, Judge Caldwell said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a scalpel. I read the conclusion first, but the opening statement is perhaps even more illuminating. He looked directly at my parents, then at Sabrina, before reading aloud. If you are reading this letter in a court of law, It means that my family has attempted to seize my estate by blaming Megan. It means they have accused her of the very manipulation they tried to practice on me. My father, Paul, turned the color of old ash. He gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. Beside him, my mother, Marianne, let out a sound that was halfway between a sob and a shriek. It was not the sound of a grieving widow. It was the sound of a woman who realizes the social script she has followed for 40 years has just been set on fire in front of an audience. She was not crying for Grandpa. She was crying because she was losing control. The judge continued reading, his voice devoid of emotion, which made the words sound even more devastating. I am writing this because I know them. The letter continued. I know that when I refuse to sign their tax shelters and their family LLCs, they will claim I am senile. They will claim I did not know what I was doing. So, let me be clear. I called the lawyer. I found the number in the phone book myself. I asked for the meeting. I asked for witnesses because I knew that if I died without a shield, they would tear Megan apart to get to the bank accounts. I sat frozen, tears streaming silently down my face. He had known. He had seen the way they looked at me, the way they spoke over me. He had built this entire legal fortress not just to protect his money, but to protect me from them. I remember the night of July 29th, the judge read. I was in my bedroom. They thought I was asleep. I heard Sabrina tell her mother that they should bring a mobile notary to the house at 11 at night. She said, "We can just wake him up. Tell him it is a medical form, and guide his hand. He won't know the difference in the dark." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Even Gordon Vance closed his eyes, looking physically pained. "That is a lie," Sabrina shouted, her voice shrill and desperate. "We never did that. He was hallucinating. It was the morphine." "It was not morphine," I said, speaking up for the first time since the reading began. My voice was steady now. "I heard you too. I was in the laundry room. That was the night I changed the locks on the back door." "You changed the locks to keep us out," Sabrina screamed. "I changed the locks to keep you from committing fraud," I shot back. "Enough," Judge Caldwell ordered. Though he did not hammer the gavel. He didn't need to. The weight of the grandfather's words was heavy enough to crush any objection. Avery Knox stood up. She moved with the precision of a predator sensing blood. "Your Honor," Avery said, placing a thick binder on the bench, "to rebut the claim of undue influence and isolation, we are submitting into evidence Ms. Flores's care logs. For the entire 6 months she lived with the decedent. She kept a detailed journal, every meal, every medication dose, every visitor, every phone call." She opened the binder to a marked page. The logs show that Ms. Flores attempted to facilitate FaceTime calls with the family 34 times. Avery stated, 34 times. The call logs confirmed that only 3 of those calls were answered, and on the dates where Ms. Hartwell claims she was blocked from visiting, the logs show Ms. Flores sent text messages inviting her to come, which went unanswered. "He was influenced," Sabrina insisted, her voice trembling. She was grasping at straws, trying to find a legal foothold on a cliff face that was crumbling beneath her. Even if he wrote that letter, Megan was there. She was whispering in his ear. She poisoned him against us. That is the definition of undue influence. Influence is not a crime. "Ms. Hartwell," Judge Caldwell said, looking at her with open disdain. "Persuasion is not a crime. Telling an old man the truth, that his daughter is waiting for him to die so she can renovate a beach house, is not undue influence. It is honesty, and honesty does not invalidate a properly executed legal procedure." The judge turned to Silas Rourke. "Does the trust have any further instruction regarding this specific scenario?" "We do, Your Honor," Silas said. He reached into his leather portfolio and produced a second document. It was smaller, bound in a blue cover. "This is the letter of instruction regarding asset preservation," Silas explained. "Mr. Flores anticipated that the family might try to use the probate process to freeze assets or force a settlement. He included a specific directive to the trustee. Silas opened the document and read aloud. If any beneficiary attempts to contest the trust or asserts control over the estate prior to the official distribution, the trustee is instructed to immediately lock all discretionary distributions. Furthermore, the trustee is directed to offset any legal fees incurred by the trust in defending these attacks against the share of the contesting beneficiary, should they have any share remaining. Silas looked at Gordon Vance. In simple terms, Silas said, every hour you bill for this hearing is coming out of whatever fraction of the estate your client might have hoped to salvage, though, given the no contest clause, that fraction is likely 0. Sabrina slumped back in her chair. She looked small. The quiet luxury armor she wore, the coat, the hair, the diamonds, suddenly looked like a costume. But there is one final item, Silas said, a matter of debt. He turned the page of the letter of instruction. Mr. Flores noted that part of the urgency regarding the family LLC was not just tax avoidance. He believed there was an undisclosed liability. Silas looked directly at Sabrina. The letter states, Sabrina asked me to co-sign a loan for $500,000 in January. She said it was for a business expansion. I called the bank. The loan was not for business. It was to cover a margin call on a personal investment account held in the joint name of her and her husband. I refused to sign. I believe they took the loan anyway, using the family name as collateral without my consent. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc. Sabrina froze. Her eyes went wide, staring at the table in front of her. She stopped breathing for a full second. She didn't know he knew. She had thought the old man was just being stubborn. She hadn't realized he had called the bank. She hadn't realized he had checked the accounts. Is this true, Ms. Hartwell? Judge Caldwell asked. His voice was dangerously soft. Did you attempt to secure a loan using the decedent's assets or name as collateral without his signature? Sabrina stammered. Her face was gray. It was a misunderstanding. The bank, it was a bridge loan. We were going to pay it back as soon as the estate settled. So you were spending the inheritance before he was even dead, Avery Knox said. She didn't shout it. She just stated it as a brutal fact. We needed the liquidity, Sabrina snapped, her control fracturing completely. The market turned. We were going to lose the house in the vineyard. He had $12 million sitting there doing nothing. He didn't need it. He was dying. And there it is, Judge Caldwell said. He closed the file folder in front of him. The sound of the cover hitting the desk was final. We are done with the motion to administer, the judge said. I am dismissing the petition for letters of administration with prejudice. The trust stands. Stonebridge is the sole authority over the assets. He looked at Gordon Vance. Mr. Vance, you will submit a full accounting of your filings today. I am setting a hearing for sanctions against you and your client for filing a frivolous motion in bad faith. Your Honor, Vance started. Save it, Caldwell said. I am also ordering a copy of these proceedings to be sent to the state bar. The judge picked up his gavel, ready to end the session, but before he could strike it, the side door opened again. The same court officer from before, the one who had brought the note about the deed transfer, walked back in. But this time, he was not alone. 2 uniformed deputies stood in the doorway behind him. The officer walked up to the bench and leaned in. He whispered something into Judge Caldwell's ear. It was a long whisper. I watched the judge's face. His expression went from angry to something far darker. He listened, nodded once, and then slowly turned his head. He didn't look at Sabrina. He didn't look at Vance. He looked straight at my father, Paul Flores. My father was sitting very still, staring straight ahead, sweat beading on his upper lip. Mr. Flores, Judge Caldwell said, I ordered you to stay in your seat earlier regarding the attempted deed transfer. I didn't sign anything, my father mumbled. It must be a mistake. The clerk has just verified the notary stamp on the document that was submitted downstairs while this hearing was in session, the judge said. And the deputies have just informed me that the notary in question is currently sitting in the lobby. Apparently, he was told to wait for a second signature from a family member. The judge leaned forward. The notary claims he was hired by a Mr. Paul Flores to notarize a signature for a man he never met. A man who has been dead for 14 days. Judge Caldwell looked at the deputies at the door. "Counsel," the judge said to the room at large, "this is no longer a civil matter." The air in the courtroom had shifted from the heavy, suffocating pressure of a storm to the sharp, metallic taste of a car crash. Judge Caldwell did not bang his gavel. He did not need to. The silence that hung over the room was loud enough to drown out the hum of the air conditioning. He looked at my father, Paul Flores, with a gaze that was no longer impatient or annoyed. It was the look a parent gives a child who has just broken something that cannot be fixed. "Mr. Flores," the judge said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the floorboards, "I strongly suggest you remain exactly where you are. There is a gentleman waiting for you in the hallway, and the paperwork he is holding has nothing to do with probate court." My father blinked, his face a mask of confusion and rising panic. He looked at Sabrina, but she was staring at the table, her fingernails digging into the wood. He looked at my mother, who was trembling so hard her pearl necklace clicked against her collarbone. "I do not understand," my father stammered. "I am just a father trying to manage his family's affairs." "The time for managing is over," the judge said. The double doors at the back of the room swung open. It was not the dramatic entrance of Silas Rourke this time. It was routine. It was bureaucratic. A uniformed deputy walked in, followed closely by a man in a plain gray suit holding a thick envelope. This was a process server, the grim reaper of civil liability. He walked past the bar, past the empty gallery seats, and stopped directly in front of my father. "Paul Flores?" the man asked. My father nodded dumbly. "You are served," the man said, thrusting the envelope into my father's chest. My father instinctively grabbed it. "What is this?" my mother cried out, her voice cracking. "What are you doing to him?" "That is a summons for a civil fraud lawsuit filed by the construction lender regarding the unauthorized loan application," the judge explained from the bench, his tone clinically detached. "And based on the information I just received from the clerk regarding the notary in the lobby, I imagine the district attorney will be adding their own paperwork to that pile very soon." The judge looked at the deputies standing by the door. "This hearing is adjourned," Judge Caldwell said. "The petition is dismissed with prejudice. The trust is affirmed. Stonebridge has full authority. And Mr. Vance, do not leave the building until you have signed the sanctions order." The gavel came down. It sounded like a gunshot. Chaos erupted in slow motion. Gordon Vance began shoving papers into his briefcase, his face shining with sweat, desperate to distance himself from the radioactive fallout of his own clients. Silas Rourke closed his folder with a calm, precise snap, as if he had just finished reading a bedtime story rather than dismantling a family. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I wanted to leave. I wanted to breathe fresh air. But my family was not done. Sabrina stood up abruptly. She grabbed my mother's arm, her grip tight and urgent. "Come on, Mom," Sabrina hissed. "We have to go. Don't say anything to anyone. Just walk." "But your father," my mother wailed, looking at Paul, who was staring at the summons in his hand as if it were a bomb. "They are going to arrest him." "They are not arresting him yet," Sabrina said, pulling harder. "We need to call the other lawyer, the criminal one, now." They moved toward the aisle, but my mother stopped. She planted her feet. She turned her head and locked eyes with me. For a second, I thought she might apologize. I thought, in some naive, childish corner of my heart, that seeing the truth laid out in black and white, seeing Grandpa's letter, seeing the proof of Sabrina's greed, would break the spell. I was wrong. My mother broke free from Sabrina's grip and lunged toward me. She didn't hit me, but she stopped inches from my face, her eyes wide and wet with a mixture of terror and rage. "You did this," she spat, The venom in her voice was so pure it was almost physical. "You destroyed him. You destroyed your father." I looked at her. I saw the lines around her mouth, the fear in her eyes. She was a woman who had spent 40 years building a picture-perfect life, and now that the frame was breaking, she needed someone to blame for the glass on the floor. "He is an old man!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "He just wanted to help, and you dragged him into this. You turned your grandfather against us, and now you are sending your father to jail. Are you happy? Is the money worth it, Megan?" The courtroom went silent again. Even the deputies stopped moving to watch. I looked at my mother. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. The anger I expected to feel wasn't there. The sadness wasn't even there anymore. There was just exhaustion. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that felt like I had been carrying a backpack full of stones for 6 months and finally, just now, let it drop. "I didn't do anything," I said softly. "You filed the papers," she shrieked. "You brought these people." "No, Mom," I said. "I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just spoke the truth. Grandpa did, and Dad signed the papers. Dad hired the notary. Dad tried to transfer the deed." I looked at my father, who was still staring at the floor. "He did it himself," I said. My mother raised her hand as if to slap me, but Sabrina caught her wrist. "Stop it, Mom," Sabrina snapped. "Not here. There are cameras." Sabrina glared at me over our mother's shoulder. There was no remorse in her eyes, only calculation. She was already rewriting the narrative in her head, figuring out how to spin this, how to position herself as the victim of a chaotic family. "This isn't over, Megan," Sabrina whispered. "You think you won the lottery? You just bought a war." "Ms. Flores," a cool voice said beside me. I turned. Avery Knox was standing there. She didn't look at my family. She stepped between us, using her body as a physical barrier. She was tall, sharp, and immovable. "We are leaving now," Avery said. She took my elbow. Her grip was firm, grounding. She guided me away from the respondent's table, turning me toward the side exit used by court staff. We walked past the clerk, past the stunned bailiff. "Do not look back," Avery murmured close to my ear. "Do not answer them. Do not defend yourself. You answer with the record. You answer with the transcripts. You do not give them the satisfaction of your tears." We pushed through the heavy side doors and spilled out into a long, quiet corridor lined with beige tiles. The noise of the courtroom, my mother's sobbing, Vance's frantic apologies to the clerk, faded instantly as the door swung shut on its hydraulic arm. I leaned against the wall and took a shuddering breath. "Breathe," Avery said. She checked her watch. "You did well. You held the line." "They hate me," I whispered. "My own mother looks at me like I am a monster." "She looks at you like a mirror," Avery said, adjusting the strap of her leather bag. "She sees the consequences of her choices reflecting back at her, and she hates the image. That is not your burden to carry." Silas Rourke stepped out of the courtroom a moment later. He looked completely unaffected by the drama, as if he had just finished a mild business lunch. "Ms. Flores," Silas said with a polite nod. "Ms. Knox, I have the certified copy of the dismissal. The assets are locked. I will begin the formal transfer of the accounts to the trust's operating account immediately." "Thank you, Silas," Avery said. "We will need a security detail for the house. If Paul was desperate enough to try a fraudulent deed transfer, he might be desperate enough to try to change the locks again." "Already arranged," Silas said. "I have a team en route to the property now." Avery's phone buzzed. It wasn't a normal text vibration. It was a rapid, triple pulse pattern. She frowned and pulled her phone from her pocket. She looked at the screen, and her expression tightened. "Stonebridge security alert," she read. Silas stepped closer, his demeanor shifting instantly from administrator to protector. "What is the code?" "Unauthorized access attempt," Avery said. "Level 3. "Access to what?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "The trust communication portal," Avery said. her fingers flying across the screen. Someone just tried to log into the administrative backend. They failed the biometric check, but they managed to initiate a change of contact request before the system locked them out. When? Silas asked. 3 minutes ago. Avery said. I did the math in my head. 3 minutes ago. That was right before the judge dismissed the case. That was right before the deputy walked in. Wait, I said. 3 minutes ago. We were still in the courtroom. Exactly, Avery said. She tapped a button on her screen. I am calling the fraud department. Hold on. She put the phone to her ear. This is Avery Knox, counsel for the Flores Trust. I have a level 3 alert on my device. Give me the origin trace. She listened for a moment, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Okay, confirmed. Hold the block. Do not lift it under any circumstances. I want a full device fingerprint. She lowered the phone and looked at Silas, then at me. The request didn't come from a hacker in Russia, Avery said. It came from a device located within the courthouse. Specifically, it came from an iPhone 14 Pro, registered to a user with the initials S.H. Sabrina, I whispered. I thought back to the courtroom. I remembered the moment after the note was read. I remembered Sabrina slumping in her chair, putting her head in her hands. I had thought she was hiding her face in shame. I had thought she was crying. But she hadn't been crying. She wasn't ashamed, I realized, feeling a chill run down my spine. She was texting. I saw her shoulders moving. I thought she was sobbing. She was trying to hijack the notifications, Silas said, his voice cold. She knew she was losing the legal battle. She knew the judge was about to rule, so she tried to change the mailing address and the email on file for the trust to her own. Why? I asked. What good would that do? If she controls the address, Avery explained. She intercepts the official notices. She intercepts the statements. She could potentially approve transactions or intercept checks before you even knew they were issued. She was trying to create a backdoor. She did it while the judge was reading the sanctions order, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. She was sitting 5 feet away from me, listening to the judge tell her she was in trouble for fraud, and she was committing more fraud. It is pathological, Silas noted. She does not believe the rules apply to her. She believes she can outsmart the system if she just moves fast enough. But it failed, Avery said. Because Stonebridge requires 2-factor authentication and voice verification for any contact change. She hit the wall. Is that it? I asked. Is she done? Avery looked at her phone again. The screen lit up with another notification. This time, it wasn't a yellow alert. It was red. Silas, Avery said, her voice dropping. Check the property title registry, right now. Silas pulled out a tablet from his portfolio. He tapped the screen rapidly. We just got a flag from the county clerk's automated system, Avery said. The alert says a lis pendens was filed electronically. What is a lis pendens? I asked. It is a notice of pending litigation, Avery said. It is a lien. It warns any potential buyer or bank that there is a lawsuit concerning the property. I thought the judge dismissed the lawsuit, I said. He dismissed the probate petition, Silas said, staring at his tablet. This is new. This was filed 6 minutes ago, just before the hearing ended. Who filed it? Avery asked. Silas looked up. His gray eyes were hard as flint. It wasn't Vance, Silas said. It was filed pro se, representing oneself. Sabrina? I guessed. No, Silas said. It was filed by an entity called Hartwell Holdings, LLC. That is her shell company, I said. The one she uses for her design business. And the basis of the claim, Silas read, scrolling down the document, is a mechanic's lien. She is claiming that her company performed $150,000 worth of renovations on the house last year and was never paid. Renovations? I exclaimed. She never touched the house. She visited twice. It doesn't matter if it is true, Avery said grimly. She filed it. It is in the system, which means there is now a cloud on the title. We cannot transfer the deed to the trust until that lien is cleared. She is trying to freeze the house, I realized. She knows she can't get the money, so she is making sure I can't get the house either. She is burning the crops, Silas said. If she can't have the harvest, she will salt the earth. Avery put her phone away. She looked at the closed doors of the courtroom. She thinks she is clever, Avery said. She thinks filing a fake lien is a brilliant tactical move to force a settlement. She thinks she can hold the house hostage and make us pay her to go away. Will we? I asked. Will we have to pay her? Silas looked at me. For the first time, a small, terrifyingly cold smile touched the corners of his mouth. Pay her? Silas repeated. Ms. Flores, filing a false mechanic's lien is a specific type of fraud in Virginia. It carries a mandatory penalty of double damages. And, Avery added, her eyes gleaming, since she used the court's electronic filing system to do it across state lines, she just committed wire fraud, federal wire fraud. She doesn't know we know, I said. No, Avery said. She thinks she just played her ace card. She thinks she's going to walk out of here and negotiate. The doors to the courtroom opened. Sabrina walked out. She had fixed her hair. She had put her sunglasses on, even though we were inside. She was walking fast, her heels clicking on the tile. She didn't look at us. She was heading for the main exit, clutching her purse tight, confident that she had planted a bomb that would force us to come crawling back to her. Let her go, Avery said softly. Let her think she won this round. Why? I asked. Because, Silas said, watching Sabrina's retreating figure. When the FBI knocks on her door in Scarsdale tomorrow morning, I want her to be completely surprised. The sanctuary of Avery Knox's office was a stark contrast to the humidity of the courtroom. It was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Richmond, a space of chrome, white leather, and silence. The air here didn't smell of desperation. It smelled of expensive espresso and printer toner. I sat at a conference table that was long enough to land a small plane on. In front of me lay a single sheet of paper. Sign this, Avery said. She didn't hand me a pen. She placed a heavy silver fountain pen next to the document. This is a directive to all counsel. From this moment forward, you do not speak to your parents. You do not speak to Sabrina. You do not accept phone calls. You do not open texts. And you certainly do not open the door if they show up at the house. All communication goes through me. I picked up the pen. The nib scratched against the paper. A sound of finality. By signing my name. I was effectively divorcing my family. I was acknowledging that the people who raised me were now hostile combatants in a war of attrition. Done, I said, sliding the paper back. Good, Avery said. She tapped her keyboard. Now, let's look at what Stonebridge just found. A large monitor on the wall flickered to life. It displayed a dashboard filled with timestamps, IP addresses, and document scans. It looked less like legal work and more like a crime scene investigation board. Silas sent this over while we were driving here, Avery explained. After they blocked the attempt to change the contact address, the fraud team did a deep dive into the pending queue of the custodian bank where your grandfather held his primary investment portfolio. The Schwab account, I said. The one with the stocks. Correct, Avery said. Look at this. She enlarged a document on the screen. It was a PDF, slightly grainy, as if it had been scanned by a phone camera in bad lighting. The title at the top read, Assignment of Interest and Authorization to Transfer. It was dated 3 days ago. What is that? I asked, squinting at the screen. It is a document purporting to grant Sabrina Hartwell the authority to use the assets in that account as collateral, Avery said. Her voice was dry, clinical. Essentially, it is a letter saying, my father is dying, but he wants me to have access to this money right now so I can secure a loan. My eyes drifted to the bottom of the page. There was a signature, Tomás Flores. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It looked like his signature. It had the loops of the T and the sharp angle of the F, but something was wrong. "It is fake," I said immediately. "How do you know?" Avery asked. "To a layman, it looks quite convincing." "The tremor," I said, pointing at the screen. Grandpa had a tremor in his right hand. When he wrote, the lines were jagged. They were hesitant. This signature. Look at the loop on the O. It is smooth. Whoever wrote this tried to make it look shaky. But they hesitated in the wrong places. They drew the shake. They didn't feel it. "Exactly," Avery said. Forensics flagged it immediately. The pen pressure is consistent with a person drawing, not writing. But here's the interesting part. This wasn't submitted to the court. It wasn't submitted to Stonebridge. Where was it sent? "It was emailed to a private hard money lender in New Jersey," Avery said. "The kind of lender who charges 12% interest and doesn't ask too many questions as long as there is paper." I sat back, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. She needed money fast. She couldn't wait for probate. She couldn't wait for the trust. She was trying to borrow against the estate before Grandpa was even cold. And she needed to prove to the lender that she had a claim, Avery finished. So she created this, a forgery. She sent this to the lender to prove she had authorization, and then she rushed into court today to try and get the official legal backing to match the lie she had already told. The screen blinked, and Silas Rourke's face appeared in a video window. He was back in his office, framed by a wall of leather-bound books. He looked as crisp and unruffled as he had in court. "Ms. Knox, Ms. Flores," Silas nodded. "We have just filed a declaration with the court regarding the document you are looking at. We are classifying this as an active attempt to defraud the estate." "Did the lender release the funds?" Avery asked. "No," Silas said. "They called the custodian bank to verify the account balance. The bank saw the deceased flag on the account and the Stonebridge trusteeship. They froze the inquiry. That is how we found it." "She is desperate," I whispered. "She is in a hole so deep she can't see the sky." Suddenly, a memory sparked in my mind. It was a small thing, a fragment of conversation from 2 months ago that I had dismissed as casual chatter. "Wait," I said. "In November? Thanksgiving." Avery and Silas both looked at me. "Sabrina came over for an hour," I said, closing my eyes to focus on the memory. "She brought a pie. She was in the kitchen, making coffee. Grandpa was in the living room watching the parade. She asked me which bank Grandpa used for his dividends. She made it sound like she was worried about him losing checks in the mail. She asked if he had set up direct deposit." "And you told her?" Avery asked gently. "I told her he used the main account for everything," I admitted, feeling a flush of shame. "I told her the account number was in the top drawer of his desk because I had to get it for the automatic bill pay." "She didn't care about lost checks," Silas said, his voice grim. "She was scouting. She needed the institution name and the account number to draft that forgery. Without the specific account details, the lender wouldn't have even looked at her application." "I gave her the gun," I said, my voice shaking. "I gave her the gun and she used it to try and rob him." "You didn't give her a gun," Avery corrected firmly. "You answered a question from a sister you thought you could trust. The betrayal is hers. Megan, not yours." Avery turned back to the screen. "Silas, I want to bind this behavior to the timeline of the court hearing. If we can prove she was actively pushing this fraud while standing in front of Judge Caldwell, it cements the bad faith argument." "Way ahead of you," Silas said. "Look at the timestamp on the email she sent to the lender updating them on the status of the court case." He pulled up another email log. "Sent. Today, 10:15 in the morning." "That was during the recess," I said. "That was right after the judge read Grandpa's letter." "She stepped out into the hallway," Avery said, her eyes narrowing. "She knew the letter was damning. She knew the no contest clause was real. So instead of stopping, she doubled down. She emailed the lender to say, 'Court approval is imminent. Wire the funds by end of day.' She lied to a creditor while the judge was deliberating on her sanctions. She wasn't crying because she was sad, I said, echoing my earlier realization. She was panicking because the loan was about to fall through. "We are going for a protective order," Silas said. "I am submitting a request to Judge Caldwell right now. We are asking for a blanket injunction against Sabrina Hartwell, Paul Flores, and any entity associated with them. They will be barred from contacting any financial institution, any utility company, and any insurance provider connected to the Flores name. If she so much as dials the customer service number for the electric bill, she goes to jail." "Do it," Avery said. "And regarding the father," Silas added, "Mr. Paul Flores." "What about him?" I asked, dreading the answer. "The civil suit he was served with in the hallway," Silas said. "We pulled the complaint. It is about a construction loan for a shell company called SPF Developments, LLC. SPF, Avery mused. "Sabrina, Paul, Flores?" "Likely," Silas said. "The lawsuit alleges that the LLC submitted falsified balance sheets to secure a $200,000 line of credit. They claimed the LLC owned machinery and assets that actually belonged to your grandfather's construction firm. They stole his inventory list," I realized. "They used his bulldozers and his trucks as collateral for their own loan." "But here is the kicker," Silas said. "Paul Flores is listed as the managing member. He signed the papers, but the operating agreement, the document that says who actually gets the money," Silas tapped a key. A document appeared. "Beneficial owner, Sabrina Hartwell, 90% interest." "She set him up," I breathed. "She made Dad sign everything. She made him the face of the company, but she kept 90% of the profit." "And 100% of the liability belongs to the signer," Avery said, her voice disgusted. "She used your father as a human shield. If the business failed, he would get sued. If it succeeded, she would get rich." "He doesn't know," I said. "Dad thinks he is a partner. He thinks she respects his business acumen. He doesn't know he is just the fall guy." "He knows now," Silas said. "Or at least, his lawyer will explain it to him very soon." The video call ended, leaving Avery and me in the silence of the high-rise office. The sun was starting to set, casting long orange shadows across the white table. Avery sighed and opened a thick leather binder, the master copy of the trust. She flipped through the pages, past the asset schedules, past the administrative powers. She stopped at a section near the end. "You know," Avery said softly, "the irony of this is almost Shakespearean." "What do you mean?" "Your grandfather knew Sabrina," Avery said. "He knew she was greedy. He knew she was reckless. But he also knew she was his daughter. He didn't want to leave her destitute. He cut her out," I said. "The trust says she gets nothing." "The trust says she gets nothing if she contests it," Avery corrected. "But look at Article 5, Section 2, the safe harbor provision." She turned the book toward me. "I read this when I was preparing," Avery said. "It is a contingency clause. Your grandfather instructed the trustee that if Sabrina accepted the trust without objection, if she allowed the administration to proceed peacefully and did not file any motions for 6 months." She tapped a paragraph. "The trustee shall distribute a one-time cash gift of $250,000 to Sabrina Hartwell, to be used for the payment of any outstanding personal debts." I stared at the number, $250,000. "That covers the loan," I whispered. "The loan she tried to hide. The loan she forged his name for." "He knew about the debt," Avery said. "He knew she was underwater, and he left her a lifeline. He left her exactly enough money to clear her mess and start over. All she had to do was wait. All she had to do was respect his wishes and not sue you." "She didn't know," I said. "Because she didn't wait to read the trust," Avery said. "She assumed he hated her. She assumed she had to fight to get anything, so she sued. She filed the motion. She attacked you." Avery closed the book. "By filing that motion this morning," Avery said, "she triggered the no contest clause. She forfeited her inheritance, But she also forfeited the safe harbor. She burned the money, I said. She lit a match and burned the only thing that could have saved her. She burned it, Avery agreed, and now she has the bank coming after her for the loan, the contractor suing her for the lien, and the FBI looking at her wire fraud. She traded a guaranteed $250,000 for a prison sentence. I looked out the window at the city lights flickering on below us. I thought of Sabrina running out of the courtroom, putting on her sunglasses to hide her panic. I thought of my father holding the summons, unaware that his favorite daughter had sold him out for 90% of a lie. "We need to send this to the judge," I said. "The safe harbor clause, the forgery, the LLC documents, send it all?" "We will," Avery said. "But Megan, there is one more thing." "What?" "The protective order we are asking for," Avery said. "If the judge grants it, and he will, it means the house is fully locked down. But it also means we have to physically secure the property. The locksmith is meeting the security team there in an hour." "I need to be there," I said. "You don't have to be," Avery said. "Stonebridge can handle it." "No," I said, standing up. "It is my house now, and there is something in the attic I need to find. Something Grandpa told me about in the letter that I didn't understand until right now." "What is it?" "He mentioned a blue box," I said. "He said, 'If they come for you, open the blue box.'" I thought he meant the trust documents, but the trust documents were with the lawyer. I looked at Avery. "I think the blue box is the rest of the proof. I think it is the evidence he kept on them." Avery nodded slowly. "Then we go. But we don't go alone." We left the office, the city below us glittering like a sea of diamonds, unaware that in a quiet house in Hollow Ridge, the final ghost of Tomás Flores was waiting to speak. The days leading up to the sanctions hearing were not filled with shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. They were filled with the quiet, rhythmic sound of a 3-hole punch and the smell of fresh printer paper. We had retreated to the library of my grandfather's house, turning the mahogany table where he used to read his morning newspaper into a command center for legal warfare. Avery Knox did not believe in leaving things to chance. She believed in timelines. On the wall, she had taped up a long roll of butcher paper. It stretched from the doorframe to the window, covered in black marker lines that dissected the last 6 months of my life into hours and minutes. "The court does not care about your feelings, Megan," Avery told me, uncapping a red marker. "The court cares about chronology. Truth is just a sequence of events that makes sense. Lies are the sequence that breaks." We started building the timeline of the trust creation. Avery marked the date Grandpa first called the lawyer, August 3rd, then the date of the independent review, August 10th, then the date of the signing, August 15th. Then she took a different color marker, blue, and began to plot Sabrina's actions. "Here is where she texted her husband about the money," Avery said, drawing a line under July 4th. "Here is where she tried to get the loan. Here is where she filed the motion." When you looked at it visually, the story was undeniable. Grandpa's timeline was slow, methodical, and deliberate. Sabrina's timeline was frantic, clustered around moments of financial desperation. It was the difference between a man building a foundation and a woman trying to outrun an avalanche. "I need your logs," Avery said, turning to me. "I need every receipt, every grocery bill, every pharmacy copay." I brought down the boxes from the closet. For months, I had kept these receipts just to keep track of the household budget. I thought I was just being responsible. I didn't realize I was building a shield. We spent hours taping CVS receipts onto blank pages. "This is not about proving you are a good person," Avery said as she highlighted a purchase for Ensure and adult diapers. "The court assumes everyone is greedy. We have to prove you were present. Look at this." She pointed to a receipt for a prescription pickup dated August 14th, the day before the trust was signed. "Sabrina claims you were isolating him, keeping him drugged," Avery said. "But this receipt shows you picked up his blood pressure medication and his inhaler. But you did not pick up the morphine refill until 2 days later. You were managing his clarity, not suppressing it. It was a small detail, but in Avery's hands, it was a weapon. It proved I wasn't keeping him sedated to get a signature. I was keeping him lucid. Silas Rourke arrived on the second day of our preparation. He brought the Stonebridge files. The intake summary. If Avery's style was aggressive and sharp, Silas's style was terrifyingly bureaucratic. He laid out documents that reduced Grandpa's life to a series of checkboxes and verified statements. "This is the capacity assessment," Silas said, sliding a document across the table. "Standard procedure for any irrevocable trust over $5 million. We require the donor to answer a series of questions to prove orientation to time and place." I read the transcript. Question: Mr. Flores, why are you placing these assets in trust? Answer: because I worked for 50 years to build this, and I do not want it spent on a summer rental in the Hamptons within 50 days of my funeral. It was mechanical, it was dry, and it was absolutely unbreakable. It stripped away any argument that Grandpa was a confused old man who had been tricked by his granddaughter. He sounded exactly like himself, stubborn, sharp, and exhausted by his family's entitlement. "This destroys the undue influence claim," Avery said, tapping the paper. "Influence implies he didn't have his own reasons. This shows his reasons were older than the trust itself." Then came the email. It popped up on my phone on Wednesday evening. It was from my father. The subject line was simply, "Family." My stomach twisted into a knot. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. "Don't open it," Avery warned from across the table. "Forward it to me. I will read it first." I forwarded it. Avery opened it on her laptop. She read it in silence, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed, a long, weary sound, and turned the laptop toward me. "Read it," she said, "but read it like a lawyer, not a daughter." I read the text. "Megan, your mother hasn't stopped crying for 3 days. We are all hurting. This has gone too far. We are a family, and families don't sue each other. We want to drop all of this. We want to come over and have dinner. We can put this behind us. We just need to find a middle ground. If we can agree to split the administration duties, maybe have a co-trustee arrangement with Sabrina, we can stop the bleeding. We just want peace. Please, honey, come back to us." Tears pricked my eyes. For a second, just a split second, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe they missed me. I wanted to believe my father was just a confused man caught in the middle. "Look at the second to last sentence," Avery said softly. I looked again. "If we can agree to split the administration duties—" "They don't want peace," I whispered, the realization hitting me like cold water. "They want back in." "They want a co-trustee arrangement," Avery translated. "That means they want veto power. They want access to the checkbook. They know they lost the legal battle, so they are trying to guilt you into opening the side door." "They are negotiating," I said, feeling the sadness harden into anger. "They are using Mom's tears as a bargaining chip. It is a settlement offer dressed up as a Hallmark card," Silas observed from the corner of the room. "And notice what is missing. There is no apology. There is no admission of the fraud with the notary. There is just a request for control." I looked at the email one last time. "Please, honey, I thought about the man in the hallway serving my father with a fraud lawsuit. I thought about Sabrina forging Grandpa's signature on the loan application." "No," I said. "No dinner. No middle ground." "Good," Avery said, "because I found something else." She pulled a thick law book from her bag and opened it to a marked page. "I have been analyzing Sabrina's motion again," Avery said. "The one she filed to start this whole mess. The emergency motion for immediate transfer of assets. We know about that," I said. "That is why we are going to the sanctions hearing." "Yes, but look at the specific language she used," Avery said. "She didn't just ask to be administrator. She asked the court to seize and transfer the assets immediately, claiming the trust was invalid. Avery pointed to the no contest clause in the trust document. The clause says you are disinherited if you seek to invalidate the trust. That is standard. But Grandpa added a second condition. You are also disinherited if you seek to seize assets contrary to the terms of distribution. What does that mean? It means, Avery said, a small, fierce smile appearing on her face, that even if she drops the lawsuit tomorrow, even if she apologizes and says it was all a mistake, she has already pulled the trigger. The act of filing the motion was the seizure attempt. It is done. She cannot unring the bell. So she is out, I said. Completely. Pending court confirmation, Silas said. But as trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to enforce the clause. I am issuing a notice of suspension to Sabrina Hartwell today. It formally notifies her that all potential distributions, including the safe harbor gift, are frozen indefinitely. She's going to lose her mind, I said. She did. But she didn't come to the house. She went to the internet. That night, my phone started buzzing with notifications from friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Megan, are you okay? I saw Sabrina's post. I opened Instagram. There it was. A black and white photo of Grandpa holding Sabrina's hand when she was a child. The caption was long and emotional. It breaks my heart to see how the elderly are manipulated in their final days. When you are kept away from the people you love, when gatekeepers control your access, it is the deepest form of abuse. I will fight for the truth, no matter the cost. Elder abuse. Family first justice. For Dad, she didn't name me. She didn't have to. The comments were full of people offering sympathy and speculating about the greedy caregiver. So sad that people take advantage of the sick. Stay strong. Sabrina, karma will get them. My face burned. I wanted to type a reply. I wanted to scream. I wanted to post the forgery. I wanted to post the text message where she hoped he would die before summer. Don't do it, Avery said, taking the phone out of my hand. She is lying to the world, I cried. She is making me look like a monster. She is fighting in the court of public opinion because she knows she is lost in the court of law, Avery said calmly. Let her have the likes. We have the judgment. But people believe her. The judge doesn't have an Instagram account, Avery said, and the judge is the only person whose opinion matters right now. If you engage with her, you look like you are part of the drama. If you stay silent, you look like the adult. We do not fight on Facebook. We fight in the docket. She handed the phone back to me. Block her, Avery said. Block them all, and get some sleep. Tomorrow is the hearing. The morning of the hearing was gray and rainy. The Virginia sky looked like a wet wool blanket. I wore a dark blue suit that Avery had approved. It made me feel armored. We arrived at the courthouse early. The stone steps were slick with rain. When we walked into the courtroom, Sabrina was already there. She looked different than she had at the first hearing. The panic was gone. She was wearing a new outfit, a soft gray dress that made her look modest and sympathetic. She had pulled her hair back loosely. She looked like the grieving daughter from her Instagram post. Gordon Vance was there too. But he looked miserable. He was flipping through papers nervously, avoiding eye contact with everyone. But Sabrina was smiling. It was a small, confident smile. She leaned over and whispered something to Vance, then patted his arm reassuringly. Why is she smiling? I whispered to Avery as we took our seats. She knows about the fraud. She knows about the forgery. Why does she look like she knows something we don't? Narcissists always think they have one more card to play, Avery said, opening her briefcase. She probably convinced herself that her reconciliation email makes her look reasonable and us look vindictive. All rise, the bailiff called out. Judge Caldwell swept into the room. He looked even more severe than he had the last time. He didn't look at the files on his desk. He looked straight at the lawyers. We are here for the sanctions hearing regarding the motion filed by Mr. Vance, the judge began, and to address the status of the trust beneficiaries. Your Honor, Vance stood up, his voice shaky. If I may, my client wishes to make a statement. She would like to withdraw her previous motion and apologize to the court for the confusion. Confusion, Judge Caldwell repeated, raising an eyebrow. Is that what we are calling it today? Yes, Your Honor. Sabrina stood up. Her voice was soft, perfectly modulated. I was emotional. I was grieving. I reacted poorly to the surprise of the trust. I just want to make peace with my sister and ensure my father's wishes are honored. I am withdrawing my claim. She looked at me with sad, wide eyes. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She was pivoting. She was trying to reset the board, to act as if the fraud and the lies had just been a misunderstanding born of grief. She was trying to save the safe harbor money. She was trying to save her reputation. I see, Judge Caldwell said. That is very convenient. Ms. Hartwell. However, the court has received a declaration from the trustee regarding a certain incompatibility with your sudden change of heart. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Silas Rourke walked in. He was wearing the same black suit. He carried the same leather portfolio, but this time, he wasn't just carrying a letter. He was carrying a thick-bound document with a red evidence tag attached to the spine. He walked past the bar, past Sabrina, past me. He didn't look at any of us. He moved with the unstoppable momentum of a glacier. He placed the document on the judge's bench. Your Honor, Silas said, his voice filling the room. The trustee submits a supplemental affidavit regarding the conduct of the beneficiary. Is this regarding the forgery? The judge asked. No, Your Honor, Silas said. We have already submitted that. This is new. Sabrina's smile faltered. She looked at the document. This morning, Silas continued, Stonebridge Security intercepted a package delivered to the decedent's residence. It was addressed to Mr. Tomas Flores. Silas turned to look at Sabrina. For the first time, I saw genuine anger in his gray eyes. It seems that while Ms. Hartwell was posting about elder abuse on social media last night, she was also finalizing a transaction she began 2 weeks ago, a transaction involving the sale of the decedent's classic car collection to a private buyer in Dubai. The room went silent. The affidavit contains the bill of sale, Silas said. Signed by Sabrina Hartwell as administrator of the estate, dated yesterday. She sold assets she did not own, for cash, 24 hours after this court stripped her of any authority. Sabrina froze. The color drained out of her face so fast she looked like a wax figure. She didn't just try to seize the assets, Your Honor, Silas said, his voice cold and final. She liquidated them. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted tectonically. If the previous hearings had been a battlefield, this was now an autopsy. There was no more shouting, no more dramatic entrances from the back of the room, and certainly no more laughter from the gallery. The air was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of impending professional doom. Judge Caldwell sat behind the bench, his hands clasped over the mountain of paper that Silas Rourke and Avery Knox had constructed. He did not look at me. He did not look at Sabrina. He was looking at Gordon Vance with the kind of stillness that makes experienced lawyers want to change careers. Mr. Vance, Judge Caldwell said. His voice was not loud. It was a flat, conversational tone that was infinitely more terrifying than a shout. I have a question about the calendar. Vance stood up. He buttoned his jacket, then unbuttoned it, then buttoned it again. His hands were shaking visibly. Yes, Your Honor. According to the sworn declaration from the trustee, the judge said, picking up a document, your office was sent a courtesy copy of the Thomas Flores Revocable Trust on August 20th. Is that correct? Vance swallowed. I could hear the dry click of his throat from where I sat. We received a document, Your Honor. Yes. And yet, the judge continued, his eyes never leaving Vance's face. On September 1st, 12 days later, you filed an emergency motion for immediate transfer of assets, claiming under penalty of perjury that the decedent died intestate and that no estate plan existed. The judge took off his glasses and set them down on the mahogany surface. Why? The word hung in the air. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of a disbarment hearing. "Your Honor, my client," Vance stammered, glancing sideways at Sabrina, who was staring straight ahead with a frozen, porcelain expression. "My client instructed me that it was invalid. She believed it was a forgery. We were acting under the belief that the document sent to us was not a legal instrument. So you decided to adjudicate the validity of the trust by ignoring its existence entirely?" Judge Caldwell asked. "You didn't file a contest. You didn't request a validity hearing. You simply lied to this court and said it didn't exist." I would like to withdraw the motion, Your Honor," Vance said, his voice cracking. "In light of the new evidence, specifically the affidavit regarding the car sale, we wish to withdraw the petition and step back." "Mr. Vance," the judge said, leaning forward, "you cannot withdraw a consequence. You rang the bell. You filed the papers. You dragged this family and this trustee into my courtroom. You do not get to say never mind just because you realized you brought a knife to a gunfight." The judge turned his gaze to the respondent's table. "Mr. Rourke, you have filed a declaration regarding sanctions?" Silas stood up. He moved with the precision of a scalpel. "We have. Your Honor, the declaration before you outlines a pattern of conduct that goes beyond simple litigation. It is harassment, it is interference, and it is fraud." Silas opened his portfolio. He didn't need to read the papers. He knew the crimes by heart. "Exhibit A," Silas stated. "At 10:15 in the morning, during a court recess, while this body was deliberating on the validity of the trust, the petitioner, Ms. Hartwell, attempted to access the Stonebridge internal portal to change the routing instructions for the estate." "Timestamp confirmed," the judge murmured, looking at the log. "Exhibit B," Silas continued. "At 10:30 in the morning, an entity controlled by the petitioner filed a mechanic's lien against the primary residence for $150,000. Claiming unpaid renovations, we have submitted sworn affidavits from the housekeeping staff and the neighbors confirming that no renovations ever took place. This was a cloud on the title created solely to block the trust from securing the property. And finally," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, "Exhibit C, the sale of the classic car collection. While standing in this courtroom presenting herself as a concerned daughter, Ms. Hartwell had already executed a bill of sale for property she did not own, collecting a deposit of $60,000 which was wired to an account in the Cayman Islands." The gallery was dead silent. Even my mother, sitting in the back row, had stopped crying. She was staring at the back of Sabrina's head as if she were looking at a stranger. Avery Knox stood up next. She didn't walk to the podium. She stood next to me, her hand resting lightly on the table, presenting a united front. "Your Honor," Avery said, "this is not just about a family dispute. This is about the integrity of the system. Ms. Hartwell didn't just sue her sister. She created legal landmines for third parties. She lied to a lender in New Jersey. She lied to a buyer in Dubai. She lied to the county clerk regarding the lien. She has used the machinery of the law not to seek justice, but to create leverage." Avery looked at Sabrina. "She treated the probate court like a casino," Avery said. "She bet that if she caused enough chaos, if she created enough liability, the trust would pay her to go away just to stop the bleeding. That is the definition of bad faith." "I agree," Judge Caldwell said. Sabrina stood up. It was a sudden, violent movement. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at the room, her eyes wide and frantic. She looked like a queen whose castle was burning down around her, but she still refused to believe the fire was hot. "I had to," she cried out. Her voice was shrill, lacking the polished modulation she usually employed. "You don't understand. I did it for the family. My father promised me that money. He promised me years ago. Megan stole it. She stole my life." "Ms. Hartwell," the judge warned. "No," Sabrina shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is the manipulator. She is the one who turned him against me. I have debts. I have responsibilities. That money was mine. It was supposed to be mine. She turned to our parents. Tell him, she screamed at them. Tell him Dad wanted me to have it. My father looked down at his shoes. My mother covered her face with her hands. They didn't move. They were drowning in the wake of her ship, and they knew it. Ms. Hartwell, Judge Caldwell said. His voice was like ice cracking. Sit down. It is not fair, Sabrina sobbed, the tears finally coming, but they were tears of rage, not sorrow. I am his daughter. I am the oldest. This is not a therapy session, Ms. Hartwell, the judge said, cutting through her noise. And this is not a stage for your grievances. This is a record, and the record shows that you have committed perjury, fraud, and theft in the span of 3 weeks. Sabrina slumped back into her chair. She looked small. The quiet luxury of her outfit, the expensive blowout, the diamond studs, it all looked like a costume now. Mr. Vance, the judge said, I am accepting your apology on behalf of the court, but I am not accepting your excuses. You had a duty to investigate the claims of your client before filing a motion to seize assets. You failed in that duty. I understand, Your Honor, Vance whispered. I am sanctioning your firm in the amount of $25,000, the judge ordered, to be paid to the trust to offset the legal fees incurred by Ms. Flores, and I am referring your conduct regarding the withdrawal of the motion to the State Bar for review. Vance closed his eyes. He knew his career in this county was effectively over. Now, the judge said, turning his attention to the document Silas had placed on the bench. Regarding the trust itself, he opened the red-tagged folder. The court finds that the filing of the emergency motion by Ms. Hartwell, combined with the filing of the fraudulent mechanic's lien, constitutes a direct challenge to the validity and administration of the trust. The judge looked at Silas. The trustee is hereby authorized to enforce the no contest clause immediately. Ms. Sabrina Hartwell is deemed to have predeceased the grantor. She forfeits all right, title, and interest in the estate of Thomas Flores. This includes the revocation of any specific bequests and the safe harbor provision. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. It was done. The safe harbor, the $250,000 Grandpa had left her to save herself, was gone. She had thrown it into the fire because she wanted everything instead of enough. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am issuing a permanent protective order. Ms. Hartwell is barred from contacting Ms. Flores, entering the property in Hollow Ridge, or contacting any financial institution associated with the estate. Any violation of this order will result in immediate incarceration. The judge picked up his pen to sign the order, but he paused. He looked up and locked eyes with my father, Paul Flores, who was sitting in the second row, clutching the civil summons he had received in the hallway. Mr. Flores, the judge said. My father jumped. Yes, Your Honor. I notice you are named as a co-defendant in the civil suit regarding the LLC fraud, the judge said. And I notice that your name appears on the notary log for the fraudulent deed transfer. I didn't know, my father stammered. Sabrina told me it was standard procedure. I just signed what she gave me. You are under oath, sir, the judge said, or you will be. When the district attorney calls you, I strongly suggest you find your own counsel, because the document I am holding here, the judge tapped the affidavit regarding the car sale, lists you as the witness to the bill of sale. You signed a document yesterday attesting that your daughter had the authority to sell that car. You facilitated the theft of estate assets. My father went pale. He looked at Sabrina. She didn't look back at him. She was staring at the table. Her jaw set in a hard, hateful line. She had used him as a witness to her crime, dragging him down with her without a second thought. I didn't read it, my father whispered. Then you should start reading, the judge said. Because ignorance is not a defense against grand larceny. The judge signed the order. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut. The court stands adjourned, Judge Caldwell said. He banged the gavel. The The sound was final. It was over. Avery turned to me. She didn't smile, but her eyes were bright. "It is done," she said. "The order is signed. The house is yours. The money is safe." "I don't feel like I won," I said quietly. "I feel like I just watched a demolition." "You survived," Avery corrected. "That is winning." We stood up to leave. Silas was already packing his portfolio. His job complete. The deputies were moving toward Sabrina. Not to arrest her, not yet, but to ensure she didn't cause a scene. As I walked past the plaintiff's table, Sabrina stood up. She didn't look at her lawyer. She didn't look at her parents. She turned slowly and looked at me. Her eyes were dry now. The tears were gone. What was left was something cold and hard, like a stone found at the bottom of a deep well. She leaned in close. The deputy took a step forward, but Sabrina didn't raise her hand. She just lowered her voice to a whisper that was meant only for me. "You think you are finished?" she hissed. "You think a piece of paper stops this? You have no idea what you just started." I stopped. I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had taught me how to braid my hair. The sister who had once protected me from bullies on the playground. The sister who had sold our father out for a loan and sold our grandfather's car for cash. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. I felt the weight of the thick folder Avery had handed me. The folder containing the truth. "It isn't finished," I said to her, my voice calm and steady. "But the file is closed." I walked away. I walked down the center aisle, past my parents who couldn't look me in the eye, and pushed through the double doors. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, leaving gaps of pale, washed-out blue. "What now?" I asked Avery as we walked down the courthouse steps. "Now," Avery said, checking her phone. "We go to the house, the locksmith is done, and Silas says the blue box is exactly where your grandfather said it would be." "The blue box," I repeated. "He said it contains the leverage," Avery said. "If Sabrina thinks she can fight this outside of court, I have a feeling your grandfather left us the ammunition to end that war too." We got into Avery's car. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw Sabrina walking out of the courthouse. She wasn't looking at us. She was on her phone, typing furiously. She was already planning her next move. She was already spinning the next web. But she didn't know about the box in the attic. She didn't know that the game had changed. She was playing for money. We were playing for history. And history is written by the people who keep the receipts. The victory did not sound like a trumpet blast or a thunderclap. It sounded like the quiet, rhythmic thud of a rubber stamp hitting paper. It sounded like the hum of a printer in a climate-controlled office. It sounded like silence. 2 weeks after the sanctions hearing, the dust had settled. Not because the wind died down, but because Silas Rourke and Stonebridge had paved over the battlefield with concrete. The transfer of the estate was not the dramatic, emotional event my family had tried to turn it into. It was boring, it was administrative, and it was absolute. I sat in the living room of the house in Hollow Ridge. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The house felt different now. For months, it had felt like a fortress under siege, a place I was holding on to by my fingertips while wolves scratched at the door. Now, it just felt like a house. My house. Silas Rourke sat across from me. He did not look like a man who had just destroyed a socialite's reputation and dismantled a fraudulent scheme. He looked like a man who was checking off the final items on a grocery list. "The deed transfer has been recorded with the county clerk," Silas said, sliding a heavy document across the coffee table. "It is no longer in the name of the estate of Tomas Flores. It is now titled directly to the Flores Family Trust. With you as the sole beneficiary of the residence, the title insurance is updated. The mechanic's lien filed by your sister's shell company has been expunged from the record." I picked up the deed. It was just a piece of paper, heavy and textured, but it carried the weight of the world. "What about the bank accounts?" I asked. "Consolidated," Silas said. "We have liquidated the old operating accounts. The funds have been moved to the trust's primary investment vehicle. Stonebridge will manage the principal, and you will receive a monthly distribution starting on the 1st of next month. The amount is substantial." He told me the number. It was enough to live on for the rest of my life. It was enough to never worry about a heating bill, or a car repair, or a sudden medical emergency ever again. But as he said the number, I didn't feel a rush of excitement. I felt a wave of relief so profound it made my knees weak. "And Sabrina?" I asked. "Is she really out?" Silas paused. He opened his portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper with a red border. "The court issued the final confirmation of forfeiture yesterday," Silas said. "The no contest clause was enforced in its entirety. Your sister's legal team attempted to file a motion for reconsideration, citing emotional distress and familial misunderstanding. The judge denied it without a hearing. He cited the trustee's affidavit regarding the car sale and the attempted fraud with the notary. So she gets nothing," I said. "Not even the safe harbor money?" "Zero," Silas confirmed. "The $250,000 your grandfather intended as a debt relief gift has been returned to the principal of the trust. Because she tried to take the whole cake, she lost the only slice that was actually baked for her." He looked at me with a rare expression of sympathy. "It is a total disinheritance, Megan, in the eyes of this trust, and in the eyes of the law. Sabrina Hartwell no longer exists as a relation to Tomas Flores. She is a stranger." I nodded slowly. It was harsh. Yes, but it was the harshness of gravity. If you jump off a cliff, you cannot blame the ground for breaking your legs. Sabrina had jumped. "And my parents?" I asked. "That was a more delicate matter," Silas admitted. "Because your father cooperated with the district attorney regarding the notary fraud, likely to avoid immediate arrest. He was not charged with a felony. However, the civil penalties are significant." Silas tapped a line item on his ledger. "The judge ordered Paul and Marianne Flores to reimburse the trust for $52,000 in legal fees. That is the cost of defending against their frivolous motions and the fraudulent deed transfer. They paid it by cashier's check this morning." "They paid it?" I asked, surprised. "I didn't think they had that kind of liquidity." "They didn't," Silas said dryly. "They took out a second mortgage on their own home. It seems their retirement is going to be much leaner than they anticipated." "They are going to hate me forever," I whispered. "They do not hate you, Megan," Silas said, closing his folder. "They fear you, and more importantly, they fear us. We sent a formal letter to your parents explaining that any further attempt to contact you, or any attempt to interfere with trust assets, would result in immediate legal action to recover damages. We also flagged their names in the interbank security system." "What does that mean?" "It means that if they walk into a bank and try to open an account in your name, or try to co-sign something related to this estate, a red light goes off on the teller's screen. They are radioactive." Silas stood up. He smoothed his suit jacket. "The administration is complete. Ms. Flores, the Stonebridge security team will remain on site for another week, just to be sure. But essentially, the file is closed." He reached into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't a legal document. It was personal stationery. "Your grandfather gave this to me on the day we signed the papers," Silas said. "He told me to give it to you only when the dust had settled. He said, 'Don't give it to her while she is fighting. Give it to her when she has won.'" He handed me the envelope. "Good luck, Ms. Flores." Silas Rourke walked out of the front door, his black shoes clicking on the hardwood. A professional ghost who had done his job and vanished. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where Grandpa had eaten his oatmeal, the same table where he had written the yellow note that saved us. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in Grandpa's shaky, jagged handwriting. It wasn't a legal declaration. It was a letter. "My dearest Megan, if you are reading this, it means Silas did his job. It means the sharks came, and you didn't let them eat you. I know you are probably sitting there feeling guilty. You are wondering if you were too hard on them. You are wondering if you should have just given Sabrina the money to keep the peace. You have a soft heart. Megan, that is why I loved you. But a soft heart needs a hard shield. Do not mourn the family you lost. They were lost a long time ago. They were lost to envy and to greed and to the terrible idea that they deserved what they did not earn. You didn't break this family. You just refused to be the glue that held their lives together. I didn't leave you this money because you took care of me. I didn't pay you for your kindness. I left you this money because I knew you were the only one strong enough to handle the truth of it. You were the only one who saw me as a man. Not a vault. Live your life, buy good coffee, plant the hydrangeas again. And remember, the truth is not a weapon you use to hurt people. It is a shield you use to keep them from hurting you. Love, Grandpa. I put the letter down. I looked out the window at the backyard. The hydrangeas were overgrown, wild and tangled. I didn't cry. I had cried enough in the courtroom. I had cried enough in the dark nights when I thought I was going to lose everything. Now, I just felt a quiet, steady strength. I picked up my phone. I had 18 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. It was my mother, or maybe Sabrina, calling from a burner phone. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I went to settings. I tapped change number. It took 3 minutes. The old number, the number my family had used to summon me, to guilt me, to harass me, was gone. Disconnected. A deadline. I sent the new number to exactly one person, Avery Knox. Then I stood up and walked to the front door. I opened it and stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp and clean. I thought about Sabrina. She was still out there. She was still rich. Technically, she still had her husband's money, though I suspected that marriage was about to face a very expensive stress test. She still had her country club membership. She still had her Instagram followers. But she was marked. In the world that mattered, the world of contracts and banks and legal standing, she was a pariah. Every time she tried to make a deal, every time she tried to sign a lease or open a trust, a compliance officer would see the flag. They would see the fraud judgment. They would see the forfeiture. She had built her life on the idea that she could talk her way out of anything. She thought she could charm the judge, or bully the witness, or spin a story that made her the victim, but she had run into the one thing a story cannot defeat: the record. I realized then that I hadn't just won a lawsuit. I had broken a cycle, for generations. Maybe. People like Sabrina had won because decent people like me were afraid to make a scene. We were afraid to look greedy. We were afraid to be the one who said no. Grandpa had given me the permission to say no, and Silas and Avery had given me the language. I went back inside. I walked to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I poured a cup, lukewarm, just the way Grandpa used to drink it, though I liked mine hot, and sat back down at the table. I opened the old folder, the blue box evidence, the receipts, the logs. I didn't need them anymore. The judge had seen them. The world had seen them. But I wasn't going to burn them. I closed the folder and tied the string. I would keep it, not to remember the pain, but to remember the method. I realized that revenge isn't always about destroying the other person. Sometimes, revenge is just living a life they can no longer touch. Sabrina wanted my inheritance. Yes, but more than that, she wanted my submission. She wanted me to agree that she was the main character and I was just the extra. By fighting back, by using the law, by staying calm when she was screaming. I had rewritten the script. I took a sip of coffee. It was good. People always say that blood is thicker than water. But what they forget is that blood can be toxic and water can cleanse. I had washed my hands of them, and as I sat there in the quiet house, listening to the silence that cost $52,000 and a lifetime of patience to buy, I finally understood the lesson. When they try to kill you with a story, don't fight them with a story. Don't scream. Don't post on Facebook. Don't try to explain your heart to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Fight them with the timeline. Fight them with the receipts. Fight them with the record. Sabrina didn't disappear from my life because I yelled louder than her. She disappeared because there was no longer any legal door for her to walk through. I had walled her out with paper, and that, I decided, was the best kind of revenge. It was quiet. It was permanent, and it was completely, administratively final. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you found Megan's journey as satisfying as I did writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and let me know which country or city you are listening in. And tell me, if you were in Megan's shoes, would you have taken the safe harbor money and run? Or would you have fought for the whole truth like she did? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, Jane Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to help us grow. And if you really want to support the channel, so more stories like this can be heard by more people, please press the hype button. I'll see you in the next video.